In my hometown of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, some children aged 10 to 17 are spending time away from their homes and guardians at night and damaging property, causing public disturbances, putting others in physical danger, or breaking the law. In response, a 9 p.m. curfew was recently proposed by the police chief, but subsequently tabled by city council members because the town did not have a shared view of the problem, and that solution did not include enough stakeholders. This leads to the question, in lieu of a curfew, how does a community leader effectively rally stakeholders to develop a neighborhood watch approach that addresses juvenile delinquency? Let's look at a few facts that add context to this question. In Pennsylvania, 1.2% of all youth are involved in the juvenile probation system. Of that number, 72% are male and 28% are female, with 40% white, 38% black, and 15% Hispanic. The most common crime committed by this youth is non-payment of fines. Narrowing our gaze to the city of Williamsport, there are approximately 4,800 students enrolled in the district, with 1,400 enrolled at the high school. The key stakeholders involved are our city policymakers, our police force, the teens, and their families. My goal with this talk is to summarize the research about juvenile delinquency prevention conducted in the past few decades, and to propose a change initiative that galvanizes multiple local stakeholder groups to collaboratively work to support change that prioritizes the well-being of our youths. I began my research journey by familiarizing myself with studies on the effectiveness of curfews that offered systematic reviews and meta-analysis. These were helpful for offering historical background as well as précis. Of the studies that reviewed curfew outcomes, 7 of 11 claimed little or no improvement to juvenile delinquency, and the remaining reported difficulties in separating correlation from causation. None claimed demonstrable success. It's worth noting that the bulk of the studies used data from the mid-1980s to early 2000s, and that the question about the overall effectiveness of curfews seems to have been largely settled by the mid-2010s. The researchers also agreed that the intent of a curfew is twofold: to lower incidents of petty crime and to promote public health and safety. To that end, the recommendations in lieu of a curfew varied, but included building better relations between law enforcement and minority groups, encouraging neighborhood watch participation, and increasing involvement from schools and families. So my question became, if a curfew isn't a viable catalyst for change, what is? After getting feedback from parents, school teachers, principals, city council members, social workers, a local criminology professor, and the police chief, a theme emerged. Our juveniles need physical and emotional support from everyone in our community. This is a group effort. Once the data convinced me that neighborhood watches would be more effective than enforcing a curfew, my approach became one of qualitative inquiry. I wanted to move from quantitative, impersonal information to local, reflective insights about my specific community. In order to flesh out my knowledge, I conducted a dozen informal interviews with key stakeholders in our city. The police chief explained his legal responsibilities and personnel limitations. The mayor detailed his efforts to bring in mentorship programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters. The school district superintendent described how our after-school programs work and the responsibilities of the school's social workers inside and outside the classroom. The high school principal discussed the legal limitations that the juvenile probation program can put on teenagers' ability to attend classes and participate in extracurricular activities like sports and band. a local nonprofit leader who specializes in juvenile mental health and recidivism, expressed concern that accessibility of her mental health support team was compromising the kids who most needed her services. I also attended several community events, everything from city council meetings to a juvenile justice discussion panel to a cookout with the cops evening mixer in my neighborhood park. I listened to parents, to teens, to pastors and coaches. Through thematic analysis of these conversations, the emerging data is clear. Public funding is limited, third spaces like malls and movie complexes are closing, and kids are receiving less oversight at home and spending more time in the virtual world of social media. No single approach can address this multi-factor problem, but the suggestions from many stakeholders were the same. Give teens more opportunities for interactions with responsible adults, and give them opportunities to see and be seen in their daily life. By listening to local voices that represented the differing viewpoints in my community, I was able to triangulate a workable first step towards combating juvenile delinquency: neighborhood watch groups. Now, at this point, you may be asking yourself one of two things. Lauren, I already live here. Why have you spent so much time giving me information I already know? Or, Lauren, I live in a different town, a different part of the country. Why have you spent so much time giving me information about a place that doesn't affect me? My information to both these questions is the same, because context matters. And in order to build a complete picture of that context, hard data and local insights are necessary components in leading a change initiative. To be an effective leader, you have to know who you're leading, and that includes knowing their values, priorities, and motivations, not just their demographic information. You aren't leading if you don't have anyone willing to follow you. And if your leadership is restricted by lack of funding and access, then you have to ask yourself, how can I create a plan, a change initiative that will inspire buy-in from all the various stakeholders? Or more simply put, how can I encourage them to care enough to embrace the change and get involved? John Cotter, author of Leading Change, stipulates that change is best begun when there's a sense of urgency, when the problem has risen to the level of action. I agree, but that's only the beginning. Yes, we have kids breaking the law and kids whose safety is at risk. We have kids getting profiled by law enforcement at a rising rate. The urgency to find a solution is there. But if the stakeholders are each claiming that the change must come from a different party, then the blame game that ensues takes the focus off of the prospect of meaningful change. A mentor of mine, Dr. Baer, writes that leading a change requires a goal, focuses on a positive outcome, reduces a gap in our understanding, and is voluntary in nature. The community needs these elements in order for the change to be successful and lasting. Again, they need to care. And what better way to encourage that care but to model that care yourself as a leader? Aristotle taught that there are 4 deliberations when considering a person's responsibility, and Dr. Baer developed a model that I'll use to emphasize this type of care. When we think about people we want to engage with, we first need to know about their circumstances, as I've just noted. In a community, do we recognize what can and cannot be changed about our circumstances? If yes, do we have the ability to recognize right from wrong? And can we act with good intent? And if that's a yes as well, then the final consideration is whether a community member can choose to participate from a place of free will, if they can engage from a place of care, not obligation or fear. I would argue that my research approach is an illustration of this model. I needed to determine the circumstances, beliefs, limitations, and motivations of the various community stakeholders as a prerequisite step to initiating a change. By explaining this model, I hope that I have illustrated the usefulness of the framework for my specific community, and also explained it in a way that allows it for it to be reproduced in other communities. I've talked about leading a community change initiative from a followership standpoint, and I'd like to wrap up this talk with recommendations for the leadership, because it's not enough to get to know your stakeholders and their motivations. You, as a leader, need a good practice. Here are my 3 recommendations. In our discussion here, we first need a goal. This always comes first. We've already collected our data and we've decided on our practical approach, creating neighborhood watch groups in our city. Now, my goal as a leader could be different than yours. That's fine. It just needs to be specific. My leadership goal is to build relationships by, first, bringing neighbors together so that they get to know the families and teens that they reside near. And second, to bring the watch leaders together so that each neighborhood has a representative who can build relationships with each other across the city and have an opportunity to get to know the stakeholders that I've already met. Now that I have a specific goal, I need to establish a baseline. In my leadership role, this looks like establishing the watch programs throughout the city. Fortunately, there is a national neighborhood watch program already established with recommendations and resources. That's where I'll start. That's my baseline. And finally, as a leader, I need to address the gap between my goal and my baseline by developing a learning plan. There are a number of considerations that go into that development, and you can explore them in Dr. Baer's book, Operational Intelligence for Health, Wellness, and Leadership. For my context, the learning plan will involve observations and experimentation, since my data revealed significant distinctions in beliefs and motivations throughout the city. For example, in some neighborhoods, our citizens' first response to a potential juvenile problem would be to call the cops. In others, it's absolutely the last thing that would happen. So my learning plan will lean heavily on the PDCA model. Plan, do, check, act. This is a cyclical model, so that as I visit neighborhood watch groups and observe their actions and reactions, I can continue to fill in learning gaps as they arise and then check back to adjust them as needed. This could look like anything from racial bias training to social and emotional health considerations to addressing poverty and a scarcity mindset. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the part that takes time, reflection, and personal investment on the part of the leader. And that's where I want to end this afternoon. Strong leadership takes hard work and careful planning, and it also takes care. Now, when I say care, I don't just mean Merriam-Webster's definitions like responsibility for health, well-being, and safety, or to be concerned about. I also mean it in the everyday sense, heart. Good leadership is transformative. And I believe that this type of change initiative will at some point require a level of care that can't be accounted for with diagrams and meetings and workbooks. Planning and strategy won't get you out of your comfy home and into your community night after night, meeting after meeting. So the intangible but very real observation I want to leave you with is this. The common thread that links everyone I spoke to is care. Every community member expressed care about our kids. Every teacher and city official and local organizer cares about our kids. And as the leader of this initiative, I care about our kids. So as I reflected on this project and the work that it requires, I found myself coming back to this concept of deep care. It has the potential to be transformative, not just for my community, not just for the neighborhood watch groups, but personally for me as a leader. Care is an integral, transformative part of this intervention. Care can bring us together and hold us together. Caring is our superpower.